Banned Book, a presentation by Colleen Ward. First of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about banning and challenging books. What's the difference? It's important to know that a challenge is different from a ban. According to the ALA, or American Library Association website, a challenge means that a person or group has objected to material in a book and wants it removed or restricted from public access. A lot of times people have their own reasons for this. If it's a group, it may just go against the morals of the group itself. If it's a parent or a teacher, they may feel it's not suited material for the children. However, banning means that the material is actually physically removed from the institution. So a challenge just means people want it removed. A ban is the actual physical removal. Also, I'd like to point out that in every one of my slides, I'm going to have a picture of a book that has been frequently banned or challenged, and the citation for the webpage it is from is right below it. And for this one, I picked The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain. First, I'd like to start off with just the facts for you. Every year, the Office for Intellectual Freedom, or the OIF, records hundreds of attempts to ban or challenge books. Some are apparently controversial, while others are not so apparent. According to the OIF, at least 46 of the Radcliffe Publishing Course top 100 novels of the 20th century have been the target of ban attempts. And the book for this page is The Giving Tree by Shel Silverstein. OIF has only been collecting data about banned or challenged books since 1990. So from 2000 to 2009, over 5,100 books have been banned or challenged for various reasons. The last week of September in every single year is Banned Book Week, sponsored by the ALA and promoted by schools and libraries all over the country. Essentially what they do during Banned Books Week is they sort of celebrate the books that have been banned in the past and encourage people to read them, get the word out, and it really is something that affects different schools and libraries and institutions of various levels from across the country. The book for this page is The Blue Sky, a novel by Toni Morrison. So, for or against. Since 1999, the percentage of people who support book banning has dropped from 55% to 46%. So that means that 46% of people completely, which makes up 30%, or mostly, which makes up 16%, agree that books containing dangerous or controversial material should be taken out of public libraries and school systems. But by contrast, that means that 54% of people believe that challenging or banning books goes against intellectual freedom and liberty, and that all books should be available on shelves. For this slide, I have Entangle Makes Free by Justin Richardson. So where does this leave us? As readers, as future educators, as people who enjoy reading in general? As you can see, the argument is split almost 50-50. But in order to make an informed decision, as with most controversial topics, we must view both sides of the argument with clarity and reason. And this is Captain Underpants by Dave Tolkien. So I'm going to start by telling you the arguments against book banning. These are the arguments of the people who believe that books should stay readily available to the public and students on shelves, in libraries, in classrooms. So the first argument, and one that you hear pretty frequently, is that banning or challenging books presents a missed teaching opportunity. So instead of just taking a book off a shelf or out of a classroom, take the reason it's being banned and learn from it instead. Use it as a teaching opportunity for your children and your students. So an example of this could be Mark Twain's Huckleberry Finn. It's been banned a lot for reasons of racist language, adult themes, unsuited for age groups. But let's just focus on the racist language, or profanity as the genre would be actually called, in a source of challenging or banning. So what does the reason for the removal say about society? What does the fact that that's what it's being banned for say about the time that it was written? Does that make you think that things have changed in society? Does it make you feel like things are different? Bottom line is, have the students learn about the background, the controversy, the implications, instead of just taking it away from them so they have no chance to understand why the material in itself is challenging. A quote from Grace Chen, head of Public School Review, says that by exposing students to a myriad of confusing and troubling topics, teachers are guiding students into the reality of the complex adult and social world. Each text is chosen for a specific grade and age group. Therefore, the books serve as a scaffold to slowly guide students to build upon more complicated ideas and realities. And the book for that slide was Harry Potter by J.K. Rowling. Another argument for against book banning is that sometimes it really has the opposite of the intended effect anyway. Lorianne Roy, who is the former president of the ALA, went on NPR to discuss how banning and challenging books can make children see the books for more than what they would in the first place. So, for example, if someone says you can't read a book, the child's going to be more interested in picking up the book than they were in the first place. They want to know what the fuss is about and why they can't read it. Lorianne Roy says, these are titles that you talk about, people have read, and for me, if I was a young person, I would be even more encouraged to investigate those titles and read them. So when you tell a person, adult or child, that they can't do something, what's the first knee-jerk instinct that they want to do? Of course they want to read it. Of course they want to know why. So the bottom line here is, if we are going to so much trouble to take a book out of the curriculum, students are going to be more likely to pick it up outside of the curriculum than they would have been in the first place. Now, this may ease up on liability for institutions, but it doesn't really get to the basic problem of the matter. The book for this night is Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. Another argument for against is parental versus institutional responsibility. This is one of the lesser arguments about this, but it does come up in a lot of the pro and anti-book banning arguments. Many books are challenged or banned because a teacher or a librarian finds something controversial about them. But who knows better than a parent what is or is not appropriate for their child in those circumstances? If you, for example, know your child has a lot of trouble distinguishing fact from fiction or reality and fantasy, maybe you know that your child in particular would not be ready for a book such as Lord of the Rings, or your teenager may not be ready for a book such as Twilight. If they have issues distinguishing the two, maybe they should start with something smaller, but you would know that as their parent. The teachers may not necessarily be as aware of that. If your child is more anxious, maybe they shouldn't read books with frightening material in them until they're a bit older or have someone to guide them through the novel. But on the other hand of this argument, what if it's just the parent who doesn't want their child to read the book, instead of the teacher or librarian trying to ban it? Recently, what they've been doing is providing alternative projects for students so that the whole class isn't taken away from the book, but the one student whose parents or the student themselves object to it, they don't have to read it. So it gives everybody a little bit of an option, no grade scale problems. It's a little bit of an inconvenience, but ultimately would make everybody in the situation a little bit happier. The book on this page is Charlotte's Web by E.B. White. So now that we've talked about all of the against the book banning arguments, let's talk about those who feel that banning books is appropriate in certain circumstances. Despite what statistics show about the roughly 50-50 ratio of people for and against the banning of books, public support for keeping books on the shelves is far more accessible than public support of banning. While I was researching this topic, it was everywhere when I looked for people who did not support the banning or challenging of books. I found source upon source upon source of academic research, statistics, everything that I needed. But when I turned around to look for websites that would promote book banning in the circumstances that would make it applicable, it's impossible to find sources. Almost everything that you find for people who are for book banning is public forum. It's ask.com, it's Yahoo Answers, it's personal blogs. There are very few statistics, and they're all very biased. And the ones that I did find, it's no wonder why, with such hate, that it's harder to find these, because every time I found a good article supporting the banning of books, it was just riddled with hate comments. So it's no wonder there are fewer of these. I feel like they're met with much more backlash, even though it's a roughly 50-50 split. And this is A Clockwork Orange. So what I found was an unbiased kind of middle chart Discovery Channel article listing the top 10 reasons for banning books. Now, I have a little bit of information on each of these topics and some of the books that they have. And just start by saying Green Eggs and Ham is the book on this page by Dr. Seuss. So, I have these numbered 1 through 10, but they go from 10 to 1. So anti-family is actually 10, and sexually explicit is 1. So I will go down the list that way. They're just numbered for organization on this page. So I'm going to start with 10, anti-family. This is one of the more common reasons that things are banned. It's in the top 10, obviously, but only 328 out of 10,000 challenges from the years 1990 to 2010 have been because anti-family reasons. It seems 328 seems like a lot, but in the scope of how many have been banned, it really isn't that many. Some examples of anti-family books are Aldous Huxley's Brave New World and the Harry Potter series. So think about those books if you're familiar with them, and think about why they might be anti-family. Harry Potter, pretty obvious example. They're both pretty obvious examples. But Harry Potter, because he grows up without parents, he's orphaned, and then the family that he does know before he goes off to Hogwarts is verbally and physically abusive to him. So some people would say it's anti-family, and it encourages children maybe to not think so highly of the recommended ideal nuclear family. And that does intimidate some people. So let's move on to 9. Drug use. U.S. Congress has attempted on numerous occasions to make any sort of instructional drug use in fiction illegal. This isn't so much to say wine or alcohol or recreational drugs can't be in fiction. It's just anything that would make a sort of instructional description available in the fiction. However, it does expand to just showing it at times, so some editions of Little Red Riding Hood were banned because she had wine in her basket. Perks of Being a Wallflower and The Color Purple both contain elements of drugs, whether it be alcohol or recreational drugs. So those have met, just for bad influence reasons, a little bit of resistance. Number 8 is nudity. It is not really one of the high-profile ones. A lot of times you'll think this would just be an illustration, but it's actually just, it can also be descriptions of nudity. So The Chocolate War and Lolita would contain elements of these and have been cited and challenged on that basis. 7 is religious viewpoint. This is a very hot topic genre for banning. Because tensions rise so high with religions and interfaith kind of back and forth, this is one of the ones that's cited more frequently. A lot of times this can be crossed over and confused with what we're going to visit when we reach number 5, which is the occult. But a lot of times people think pagan themes in books such as Harry Potter or Miller's The Crucible or anything that sort of has magic or anything that could be construed against a certain religion has been challenged. Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses is probably the most frequently challenged book on the point of religious viewpoint. 6 is homosexuality. This one's become a little bit bigger probably in the last 2 decades as tensions have heated up and this has become a more public matter. Heather Has Two Mommies is an example of this. Dance on My Grave, which is about a 14-year-old boy who is pondering his sexuality. And then probably the most popular and sometimes most outrageous for some people book that's been banned on grounds of this is Tango Makes Three. Now, I showed the cover of this book earlier in the slideshow. It is a children's book about 2 penguins, both male, who adopt and raise a younger penguin. A lot of people have said, I don't want my children reading that. It implies homosexuality, and I don't like the way that it's training my children to think. Now, there's a group in Arkansas called the Parents Protecting the Minds of Children, and they've challenged over 55 books just on the sole premise of homosexuality in the last 10 years. They've challenged other books too, but this is their most frequent challenge. It's such a heated debate that some people will say that they don't even want their children reading about it. They don't even want them to know about it. So this one, especially in recent years, has been challenged more frequently. 5, what I was mentioning earlier, is the occult. So some background. Soon after Harry Potter's release in the original book, firefighters in Maine actually had to stop a public book burning. Lord of the Rings has been successfully burned in New Mexico, and the most recent event, or most well-noted event, was 2001. And others that kind of have images of the occult are Twilight, Alvin Schwartz's Scary Stories series. Alvin Schwartz actually redid his entire series in the past few years to make them less frightening to children, which is a shame, because I liked those books when I was younger. Number 4 is Unsuited to Age Group. This one is very vague, but it shows up a lot. It is 1/5 of all challenges that have occurred between 1990 and 2010 have to do with this. So this pretty much could be anything. This just means that the group of children that are reading it in schools, the material is not necessarily appropriate for them. So you may think this would have something to do with the things we've already talked about, maybe, nudity or homosexuality, or we haven't gotten to violence yet, but violence. But it's actually just more about the themes in the book. So you don't really think of Shakespeare as something that gets banned often, but the murder and the implications in Macbeth actually have it banned under unsuited age group a lot. The suicide contemplation in Hamlet is also something that has been unsuited for age group. Of Mice and Men, because of some of the sexuality and more violent scenes, have been unsuited to age group. So the thing that is to note about unsuited to age group is that a lot of the other of these 10 categories can fall into this. It's just about age appropriateness. A lot of times they won't let you read about the Holocaust in schools because of unsuited to age group. So it might be your reading level, but it just may not be appropriate for the age you are. 3 is violence, which I just sort of touched on a little. Some examples would be The Giver by Lois Lowry, Lord of the Flies by William Golding, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. These are pretty self-explanatory. Any sort of real violence they don't want their children exposed to, or just students in general to be exposed to, it's something we will talk about a little bit later in this slideshow. Some of Stephen King's novels may or may not have inspired some school shootings. So really, violence is the primary concern, is that reading about violence will inspire violence in children. 2 is offensive language. Now, this has made up 2,658 of the challenges from 1990 to 2010. That's out of 10,000, so that's a pretty hefty chunk for just 10 different genres. Offensive language doesn't just have to be profanity either. I mentioned earlier Huck Finn. This can have implications beyond just swear words, as you might call them. It can also be racist language, any language that can put down a general stereotype or group of people. So some examples of this would be Clockwork Orange, Catcher in the Rye, Slaughterhouse-Five, and then on basis not just of swear words profanity, but also racial profanity, Huck Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird. Alright, now the big number 1 on this is sex. It's sexually explicit. This is one of the oldest reasons for challenging books on bookshelves. Fanny Hill by John Cleland is one of the first books that has been banned for sexuality. And it's not a very well-known book, but for those of you who have read it, I read it my senior year of college in an independent study on British literature. It is explicit. It is about a prostitute, and it was the first thing of its kind in its time. And it really set the stage for sort of sexually explicit smut, if you will, in literature. And today you see that sort of stuff everywhere, but for the most part it's well marketed. So the 50 Shades of Grey series won't be found in your local high school. But there are still some that have maybe some less obvious sexually explicit scenes that people may not want their children reading. So Voltaire's Candide, James Joyce's Ulysses. These are some that maybe you wouldn't think of off the top of your head when you think of sexuality, but they still might have explicit sex scenes described in them that people don't want their children reading. They'd feel more comfortable telling their children at home than having them read about it in literature. However, what I found interesting about this reason is that it's actually been declining in the past decade. Now this, they said in part, is because of the technological age. People are growing less concerned, believe it or not, with children reading about sex in literature because it's so accessible to them on the internet. So they said expect to see a little bit more of a drop in this. It may go from number 1 a little further up this list because it's not presenting us as much of a problem anymore with how accessible it is. Take away from that what you will, but I thought that was interesting. Alright. Another argument for that I found, and I did mention earlier that I could really not find much but blogs on this. So this was, actually it looked like a very educational blog called The Federalist. Mark Hemingway is the writer, and I liked that he had his feet in a couple of different areas, so I felt that it was fair. It was a little bit biased, but I tried to take out of it what I could that seemed like it was very neutral. So he's a father, he's a writer, and he's a member of the school board at his kid's Lutheran school. So you see what I mean by he sort of had his feet in everything. It seems like a very good compromise. So he writes a lengthy and convincing article on the need for occasionally banning books with material that can be harmful for children. He talks about Lauren Miracle's books, which are the kind of books written almost as instant messenger speak in the past few years. They're very popular with the young adult readers, but they do contain very sexually explicit material. And he talks about the quote that she gave, "Knowledge never hurts." Now this was his big problem, because he says that a lot of people who are anti-book banning use this as their sort of argument, that knowledge never hurts. But he goes on the record saying, to say that knowledge never hurts is to deny that books have any power to influence people at all. And if you're not trying to influence people, why write? And I thought this was a very profound point, because if you're saying knowledge never hurts, it has the inability to evoke emotion. Why would you write something without knowledge, without the inability to evoke emotion? So I thought this was a very sound argument that he made. And then he also went on, this is what I was referring to earlier when we talked about violence. Stephen King's book Rage was loosely connected to 4 separate school shootings. And this is a big deal, especially as we're seeing school shootings really on the rise in the media and the news in the past few years. And he quotes, Stephen King has a quote in this article that says, "My book did not break these teenagers or turn them into killers. They found something in my book that spoke to them because they were already broken. Yet I did see Rage as a possible accelerant, which is why I pulled it from the sale. You don't leave a can of gasoline where a boy with firebug tendencies can lay hands on it." So what he's saying here is he pulled his own book from the shelves because it's not that he was inspiring these children to do this, but the children who were doing this were finding something in his works. He's not saying his book is responsible, but he's also saying, why would I leave gas next to someone who's a pyro? It's just not safe. So Hemingway's thought process is this. In an ideal world, there would be enough regulation and responsible adults available to keep disturbed children away from this kind of material so that Stephen King wouldn't have to pull his books from the shelf. His argument is that book banning and challenging is necessary because if you're having children who may not be stable, wouldn't you want to take the books away from them so as not to give them ideas? So I'd like to give some final thoughts. Before I do this, I'd like to touch on mine. I picked this topic specifically because I was very, very biased towards one side. I know Dr. Carnes' child has said not to pick one you're biased about, but I wanted to give an open mind look at it. And I was very, very anti-book banning. I am big on freedom and liberty for intellectual freedom, but actually, I think researching this has opened my mind a little more. I still feel I am very anti-book banning, but I also feel like it's good to see the other side. I wish the arguments on the other side weren't so opinionated and biased. I wish they had a little more statistical reasoning behind them, and I'd be a little more inclined. But I have felt that this research and this presentation has kind of helped me move from so far in one direction to kind of a little bit towards the middle. Now, just some thoughts. You can comment on any of these for your response if you want. But I posted a video on here. This is not my video. This is from a YouTube user named Lindsay with an A. But the video link displays various popular novels along with quotes about why they were challenged or banned, so what the content problem was with them. It's set to a really jazzy Irish tune. And this video, though it's the most impartial one I could find, it's still a bit partial against the banning of books. It's got some quotes interspersed about intellectual freedom, so just kind of try to ignore those. Watch this without the bias. Instead, try to watch this video and put yourself into the shoes of all the parties involved. The parent, the teacher, the student, the librarian, etc. So for the books that you've read, out of the following in the video, do you agree with the quotes? you disagree. What would you do in situations where the controversy comes up in any of these positions? Sort of keep those in your mind as you're watching them and think about whether or not you agree. Can you see it from an unbiased point of view? And if not, how hard was it for you to try? Thank you so much for watching, listening to my topic today. These are my references, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thank you very much.